Sarah Mitchell walked into the crowded coffee shop on a busy Tuesday morning, her sleeves rolled up from the summer heat. She had just finished her night shift at the local hospital where she worked as a nurse. The exhaustion showed on her face, but she needed her usual coffee before heading home to sleep. As she stood in line, she noticed people staring at her left forearm. There, clearly visible, was a tattoo that looked like a simple anchor surrounded by what appeared to be random numbers and letters. To most people, it looked like typical sailor artwork, maybe something she got during a rebellious phase in college. The teenager behind her snickered. "Look at that weird tattoo," he whispered to his friend, not bothering to lower his voice much. "What kind of person gets numbers tattooed on their arm? Probably her prison ID or something." Sarah heard the comment but didn't turn around. She was used to the stares and whispers. The tattoo had been causing reactions like this for 15 years now. Most people assumed it was just a random design or maybe coordinates to some romantic spot. She had learned long ago not to explain what it really meant. The barista, a young woman with purple hair, gave Sarah a sympathetic smile when she reached the counter. "Don't mind them," she said quietly while preparing Sarah's order. "I think your tattoo is cool. Very nautical." "Thanks," Sarah replied simply, paying for her coffee. She had heard every possible interpretation over the years. Some people thought it was coordinates to buried treasure. Others assumed it was some kind of code from a video game. A few had guessed it was military-related, but they usually imagined it belonged to a boyfriend or husband who served. As Sarah waited for her drink, an elderly man sitting nearby looked up from his newspaper. His eyes fixed on her tattoo and his expression grew serious. He studied the numbers carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Excuse me, miss," he called out softly. Sarah turned toward him, expecting another curious question about her ink. "That tattoo," he said, his voice respectful. "Those numbers, they wouldn't happen to be coordinates, would they?" Sarah paused, surprised by the directness of his question. Most people just stared or made jokes. This man seemed different. There was something knowing in his eyes. "Yes, they are," she admitted cautiously. The man's face changed completely. The casual curiosity was replaced by something deeper. Recognition, respect, and what looked like sadness. He stood up slowly, his age showing in his careful movements. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly, extending his hand. "My son was Navy. He never made it home from Afghanistan." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the familiar weight of grief that came with these encounters. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said genuinely. The old man nodded and sat back down, returning to his paper with a distant look in his eyes. Sarah collected her coffee and left. But she could feel other customers watching the interaction with confusion. They had witnessed something they didn't understand, but the respect in the old man's voice had been unmistakable. Walking to her car, Sarah reflected on how many times she had been in situations like this. The tattoo was simultaneously the most personal and most misunderstood thing about her appearance. It represented the most significant event of her life, yet most people who saw it had no idea what they were looking at. She had gotten the tattoo 3 months after returning home from her second deployment. At the time, it felt necessary, a way to carry something permanent that honored what had happened. The artist who did the work was a veteran himself, and understood immediately what the coordinates meant when she explained them. "You sure about this?" he had asked, preparing his equipment. "Once it's on there, everyone's going to see it. You ready for the questions?" Sarah had been certain then. She needed something visible, something that would make the memory real in a way that couldn't be hidden or forgotten. The nightmares were still frequent, and the therapist at the VA hospital had suggested finding meaningful ways to honor her experience and her lost teammates. Now, 15 years later, she sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice. The constant attention was exhausting. People either dismissed it as meaningless decoration or made assumptions that were completely wrong. Very few people understood what they were actually seeing. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Linda, asking if she wanted to come to a family barbecue that weekend. Sarah smiled, thinking about her nieces and nephews. They had grown up seeing her tattoo and accepted it as just part of Aunt Sarah. To them, it wasn't strange or mysterious, it was simply part of who she was. But she knew that at any family gathering, there would likely be new people who would stare and whisper. Linda's new boyfriend had already made several awkward comments about it during their last meeting, asking if she planned to get it covered up or removed. Sarah finished her coffee sitting in her car in the parking lot. watching people walk by on the sidewalk. A jogger passed wearing a shirt with an American flag. A businessman hurried past talking loudly on his phone about quarterly profits. A mother pushed a stroller while her toddler pointed at dogs and birds with excitement. All of these people living their normal lives, unaware that they had just walked past someone whose tattoo told a story of sacrifice, loss, and survival. Most of them would never know what it was like to make the kinds of decisions she had made, or to lose people the way she had lost them. Starting her car, Sarah headed home to her quiet apartment. Tomorrow would bring another shift at the hospital. More patients to care for and probably more curious looks at her forearm. She had learned to live with the constant misunderstanding, but sometimes she wondered what it would be like to meet someone who truly understood what those coordinates represented, without any explanation needed. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at the annual community festival downtown. Her sister Linda had convinced her to come, promising it would be a fun distraction from work stress. The festival was crowded with families, food vendors, and local musicians performing on a small stage. Sarah was browsing the craft booths when she heard someone behind her make a comment about her tattoo. "Look at that girl's arm," a woman said to her friend. "What kind of person gets coordinates tattooed on themselves?" "Probably where she met her boyfriend or something romantic like that." The friend laughed. "Maybe it's where she buried the evidence," she joked, thinking she was being clever. Sarah turned around to see 2 middle-aged women pointing at her and giggling. They weren't being particularly quiet about their speculation, and other people nearby had started looking in her direction. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely, "but those coordinates aren't what you think they are." The first woman looked embarrassed at being caught talking about her, but the second one seemed emboldened. "Oh, really? What are they then? Some kind of secret code?" Before Sarah could respond, more people had gathered around, curious about the confrontation. She found herself in the center of a small crowd, all staring at her forearm with various expressions of amusement and curiosity. "Come on, tell us," someone else called out. "We're all dying to know what's so special about some random numbers." Sarah felt her face flush with anger and frustration. These people were treating her tattoo like entertainment, like a puzzle for them to solve for fun. They had no idea they were making light of something sacred to her. "It's coordinates to a place in Afghanistan," she said firmly, hoping that would end the conversation. Instead, it seemed to encourage more questions. "Afghanistan? Were you deployed there?" asked a man wearing a baseball cap. "Yes, I was," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "So it's like coordinates to your base or something?" The original woman pressed. "That's actually kind of cool, I guess." "No," Sarah said, her patience running thin. "It's not coordinates to a base." The crowd waited expectantly, clearly wanting more details. Sarah realized she was trapped in a situation where either she would have to explain something deeply personal to strangers, who were treating it like gossip, or she would have to walk away and leave them to continue their speculation. "It's coordinates to where my unit was ambushed," she said quietly. "Where I lost friends." The mood of the crowd shifted immediately. Some people looked uncomfortable and began to disperse. Others seemed even more interested, as if she had just revealed the plot twist in a movie they were watching. "Wow, that's heavy," said a young man. "How many people died?" Sarah stared at him in disbelief. The casualness of his question, asked with the same tone someone might use to ask about the weather, made her stomach turn. "I don't think that's any of your business," she said, pushing past the group and walking quickly away from the craft booths. But the damage was done. As she moved through the festival, she could feel people pointing and whispering. Word had spread through the crowd about the woman with the death coordinates tattooed on her arm. Some people stared with morbid curiosity, while others looked at her with uncomfortable pity. Sarah found Linda at the food truck area and explained what had happened. Her sister was immediately angry on her behalf. "People are so stupid," Linda said, wrapping an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "They have no idea what you've been through." "Maybe I should get it covered up," Sarah said, voicing a thought that had been recurring more frequently lately. "I'm tired of dealing with this everywhere I go." "Don't you dare," Linda said firmly. "That tattoo means something important to you. Don't let ignorant people take that away." As they walked through the festival together, Sarah noticed how different people's reactions were when she was with Linda. Her sister's presence seemed to provide a buffer, making strangers less likely to stare openly or make comments. But Sarah could still feel the weight of curious glances. They stopped to listen to a local band performing patriotic songs. During a rendition of God Bless America, Sarah noticed several people in the audience looking at her with what seemed like newfound respect. The same tattoo that had been the subject of jokes and speculation an hour earlier was now being viewed differently because they knew it was connected to military service. This shift in perception frustrated Sarah even more than the original mockery had. She didn't want pity or hero worship any more than she wanted ridicule. She just wanted to exist without constantly having to manage other people's reactions to her personal choices. After the song ended, an older veteran approached her. He was wearing a VFW cap and walked with a slight limp. "I heard what happened earlier," he said quietly. "I'm sorry people were disrespectful. Some folks just don't understand what service means." Sarah appreciated his kindness, but she was emotionally drained from the day's events. "Thank you," she said simply. "I lost friends in Vietnam," he continued. "Different war, same pain. You honor them by carrying their memory." His words touched her, but they also reminded her of how isolated she often felt. This man understood her loss in a way that most people couldn't, but encounters like this were rare. Most of the time, she was surrounded by people who had no frame of reference for what her tattoo represented. As the sun began to set, Sarah and Linda decided to leave the festival early. Walking back to their car, they passed groups of people still enjoying the music and food. Families with young children, teenage couples holding hands, elderly people sitting on benches and watching the world go by. "Do you ever wish you could just blend in?" Linda asked gently. Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I think about why I got the tattoo in the first place. It wasn't meant to be hidden." "What do you mean?" "I got it where people could see it because I wanted their sacrifice to be visible. I didn't want their deaths to be forgotten or ignored." Sarah touched the tattoo unconsciously. "I just didn't realize how hard it would be to live with that visibility." Linda nodded, understanding. They drove home in comfortable silence, both lost in thought about the complexity of honoring the dead while trying to live among people who had no connection to that loss. That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the day's events. The festival had been a microcosm of her daily experience. Misunderstanding, curiosity, judgment, and occasional recognition from those who shared similar experiences. She wondered if there would ever be a time when she could exist peacefully with her choice to wear her grief and honor so visibly. 6 months passed, and Sarah had developed better strategies for dealing with public reactions to her tattoo. She learned to position herself in crowds to minimize visibility, chose clothing that could partially conceal it when appropriate, and perfected polite but firm responses to unwanted questions. Her work at the hospital provided some refuge because her colleagues had long since stopped noticing or commenting on it. The medical environment seemed to attract people who were more focused on immediate human suffering than on personal curiosities. Still, she occasionally encountered patients or visitors who would fixate on it. One particularly busy Thursday evening, Sarah was working in the emergency department when a new patient arrived. The man was in his 40s, brought in by ambulance after a motorcycle accident. He was conscious but had suffered road rash and a possible concussion. While Sarah cleaned his wounds, the patient's eyes focused on her tattoo. She braced herself for the usual questions or comments, but instead, he studied it with an intensity that was different from typical curiosity. "Those coordinates," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from pain. "Afghanistan?" "Yes," Sarah replied, continuing her work without looking up. "Helmand Province?" Sarah's hands paused for a moment. Very few civilians could identify specific provinces in Afghanistan, let alone connect coordinates to locations. She looked at the patient more carefully. "How do you know that?" she asked. The man's expression was serious despite his injuries. "I spent 3 tours there. Army infantry. Those coordinates. They're near where we had some bad incidents." For the first time in months, Sarah found herself talking to someone who might actually understand the significance of her tattoo without lengthy explanations. As she continued treating his wounds, they discovered they had served in overlapping time frames and had mutual acquaintances in other units. "I lost my squad leader at coordinates that were maybe 10 clicks from those," the patient said, pointing at her tattoo. "IED on a patrol route we'd used dozens of times." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "I'm sorry for your loss. Same to you. I'm guessing those coordinates aren't marking a victory." "No, they're not. They worked together in comfortable silence while Sarah finished his treatment. This man didn't need explanations about survivor's guilt, about the weight of carrying coordinates that marked the worst day of her life, or about the complexity of honoring the dead while trying to live normally. When she was done, the patient extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for remembering them." "Thank you for yours," Sarah replied, shaking his hand. After her shift, Sarah reflected on how different that interaction had been from most others. The patient understood immediately what he was seeing because he carried similar invisible wounds. There were no inappropriate questions, no jokes, no attempts to make light conversation about something that deserved solemnity. The next week, Sarah was grocery shopping when she overheard a conversation in the checkout line behind her. Two women were discussing a news story about veterans' suicide rates, talking about it with the same casual tone they might use to discuss a television show. "I just don't understand why they can't get over it," one of them said. "I mean, they chose to join the military. They knew what they were signing up for," the other woman agreed. "And we have so many programs to help them now. Therapy, support groups, all that stuff. If they're still having problems, it's probably because they're not trying hard enough to get better." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. These women were discussing her community, her friends, her own struggles, as if they were character flaws rather than natural responses to trauma. They were talking about suicide as if it were a choice made by weak people, rather than the end result of pain that had become unbearable. She turned around to face them. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." Both women looked surprised and slightly defensive, probably expecting to be criticized for talking too loudly in public. "I'm a veteran," Sarah continued, her voice steady but firm, "and I want you to know that your understanding of veteran suicide is completely wrong." The first woman looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean any offense. You think we chose to have our friends blown up by IEDs? You think we chose to watch people we love die in front of us? You think we chose to come home with brains that won't stop replaying the worst moments of our lives?" Other shoppers in nearby checkout lines had begun to notice the conversation. Sarah was aware she was making a scene, but she couldn't stop herself. "The programs you mentioned, most of us use them. We go to therapy. We take medications. We participate in support groups. But healing from trauma isn't like recovering from a broken bone. You can't just follow a treatment plan and expect everything to go back to normal." The second woman tried to interject. "I'm sure it's very difficult." "No," Sarah said, cutting her off. "You're not sure it's difficult because you have no idea what difficult actually looks like. You just demonstrated that by suggesting that veterans who struggle are simply not trying hard enough." She could feel her heart racing, and she knew she needed to end this conversation before she said something she would regret. The familiar feeling of being misunderstood and judged was overwhelming her. "This tattoo on my arm," she said, rolling up her sleeve so both women could see it clearly. "These are coordinates to where 3 of my friends died. I got it tattooed on my body because I wanted to carry them with me everywhere I go. That's not weakness. That's love." Both women stared at the tattoo, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. Other shoppers were watching with various expressions of curiosity, embarrassment, and support. "I think about those coordinates every single day," Sarah continued. "I dream about them. I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes thinking I'm still there. But I'm not suicidal because I'm weak or because I'm not trying hard enough to get better. If I ever reach that point, it would be because the pain of remembering them hurts more than I can handle." The cashier had stopped scanning items and was listening intently. An elderly man in another line nodded approvingly at Sarah's words. "So maybe next time you want to discuss veteran suicide," Sarah concluded, "you should consider talking to actual veterans instead of making assumptions about our character and our commitment to healing." She paid for her groceries quickly and left the store, her hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. In the parking lot, she sat in her car for several minutes trying to calm down. Part of her felt good about speaking up, about challenging ignorant assumptions that contributed to the stigma many veterans faced. But another part of her felt exposed and vulnerable, as if she had revealed too much of herself to strangers who probably still didn't understand. Her phone rang, and she saw it was Linda calling. "Hey, how are you?" her sister asked. "I just had a confrontation at the grocery store," Sarah said, explaining what had happened. "Good for you," Linda said immediately. "Those women needed to hear that. Maybe, but now I feel like I'm emotionally drained for the rest of the week." You can't educate everyone, Sarah, but you can speak up when you hear something really wrong. Driving home, Sarah thought about the balance between protecting her own emotional well-being and standing up against misconceptions that harmed her community. The tattoo made these encounters inevitable, but perhaps that was part of its purpose too. 2 years had passed since Sarah started working at City General Hospital, and she had found a rhythm in her life that felt sustainable. Her colleagues respected her work, her patients appreciated her care, and she had built friendships that didn't revolve around her military service or her tattoo. But on a humid August morning, everything changed when she was assigned to work with a new doctor who was doing a rotation in the emergency department. Dr. Marcus. Chen was a recent graduate from Johns Hopkins who had chosen to do his residency at a public hospital to gain experience with diverse patient populations. When Sarah introduced herself, Dr. Chen's eyes immediately went to her tattoo. Unlike most people, he didn't stare or make comments. Instead, he simply nodded and focused on the patient charts they needed to review together. For the first few hours of their shift, they worked efficiently as a team. Dr. Chen was clearly brilliant and dedicated, asking thoughtful questions about patient histories and treatment protocols. Sarah found herself impressed by his clinical skills and his respectful manner with both patients and staff. During a brief break between patients, Dr. Chen finally addressed what he had noticed earlier. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he said carefully, "but is that tattoo coordinates?" "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, expecting the usual follow-up questions about what the location meant or why she had chosen to get it tattooed. Instead, Dr. Chen surprised her. "My brother was a Marine. He has a similar tattoo, but his is on his back where most people can't see it. He says carrying those coordinates helps him feel connected to the guys he lost." This was not the conversation Sarah had expected to have. "Your brother served in Afghanistan?" "2 tours. He came back pretty messed up, but he's doing better now. He's actually starting medical school next year. Says he wants to work with other veterans." For the first time in years, Sarah found herself talking to someone who understood the tattoo through family experience, rather than curiosity or judgment. Dr. Chen didn't ask for details about what had happened at those coordinates, didn't express pity or awkward gratitude for her service, and didn't treat her tattoo as either a conversation piece or something to be ignored. As their shift continued, they developed a natural working relationship built on mutual professional respect. Dr. Chen never brought up her military service again, but there was an underlying understanding between them that made their interactions comfortable in a way that was rare for Sarah. Near the end of their shift, they treated a homeless veteran who came in with infected wounds on his legs. The man was clearly struggling with mental health issues and substance abuse, and he became agitated when Dr. Chen tried to examine him. "I don't want some rich kid doctor touching me," the patient said. Pulling away from Dr. Chen's attempts to clean his wounds, Sarah stepped forward. "Sir, Dr. Chen is here to help you. We just want to take care of these infections." The veteran looked at Sarah and noticed her tattoo. His demeanor changed immediately. "You serve?" he asked. "Yes, I did." "Afghanistan?" "Yes." The man's eyes filled with tears. "I was there too. Lost my whole squad. Been on the streets ever since." Sarah knelt down beside the examination table so she was at eye level with the patient. "What unit were you with?" As the veteran shared his story, Dr. Chen quietly continued his examination, cleaning and treating the infected wounds while Sarah kept the patient calm through conversation. They worked together seamlessly, with Sarah providing emotional support while Dr. Chen provided medical care. After the patient was stabilized and admitted for further treatment, Dr. Chen and Sarah finished their documentation together. "That was impressive," Dr. Chen said. "The way you connected with him made all the difference." "That's what the tattoo is really for," Sarah said quietly. "It's not just about remembering the dead. It's about recognizing the living who are still carrying that weight." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "My brother says the same thing. He can spot other veterans in a crowd because he knows what to look for in their eyes." Over the next several weeks, Sarah and Dr. Chen were often scheduled to work together. Their partnership was highly effective, and other staff members began requesting to work with their team because patients responded so well to their care. But their professional relationship was tested when Dr. Chen's attending physician, Dr. Rodriguez, began making comments about Sarah's tattoo during staff meetings. "I think it's unprofessional for nurses to display personal tattoos so prominently," Dr. Rodriguez said during one team briefing. "We should maintain a neutral appearance that doesn't distract from patient care." Dr. Chen immediately spoke up. "With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, Nurse Mitchell's tattoo has actually enhanced patient care in several situations I've observed. Veterans feel more comfortable opening up to medical staff when they recognize shared experiences." "That may be true," Dr. Rodriguez replied, "but we can't make policy decisions based on anecdotal evidence. Professional appearance standards exist for good reasons." Sarah felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. Being discussed as if she weren't present in the room was humiliating, especially when the conversation focused on something so personal. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said, standing up from her chair, "my tattoo has never interfered with my ability to provide excellent patient care. In fact, as Dr. Chen mentioned, it has often helped me connect with patients who might otherwise be resistant to treatment." "I'm not questioning your clinical skills," Dr. Rodriguez said, "but hospital policy requires that we consider how personal displays might affect our professional image." "This isn't a personal display," Sarah replied firmly. "This tattoo represents my service to this country and honors friends who died protecting it. If that somehow damages the hospital's professional image, then perhaps this institution doesn't deserve to treat the veterans who need our care." The room fell silent. Other staff members looked uncomfortable with the tension that had developed. Dr. Chen watched the exchange with obvious concern for Sarah, but also awareness that intervening further might complicate his own position as a resident. Dr. Rodriguez seemed taken aback by Sarah's directness. "I didn't mean to imply disrespect for your service," he said. "I'm simply trying to maintain consistent standards for all staff members." "Then perhaps those standards should be examined more carefully," Sarah said. "Because if they prevent healthcare workers from displaying meaningful symbols of service and sacrifice, they may need to be reconsidered." The meeting ended awkwardly, with Dr. Rodriguez promising to review hospital policies with administration. As staff members filed out of the conference room, Dr. Chen approached Sarah. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm tired of having to justify my choices to people who have never made sacrifices for anything bigger than themselves," Sarah said. "For what it's worth, I think you handled that perfectly. My brother would be proud of how you stood your ground." Sarah appreciated his support, but she worried that the confrontation might affect her job security. She had worked hard to build her reputation at the hospital, and she didn't want a dispute over her tattoo to overshadow her clinical competence. That night, she called Linda to discuss what had happened. "You did the right thing," Linda assured her. "If they try to discriminate against you because of that tattoo, they'll have a legal fight on their hands." But Sarah knew the situation was more complicated than simple legal protections. Hospital politics could be subtle, and she wondered if her outspoken defense of her tattoo would create ongoing tensions with supervisors and colleagues. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Dr. Rodriguez, Sarah received an email from hospital administration requesting a meeting to discuss professional presentation standards. Her heart sank when she read it, knowing this was likely a follow-up to the dispute about her tattoo. The meeting was scheduled with the chief nursing officer, Mrs. Patricia Williams, a woman Sarah had always respected for her fairness and advocacy for nursing staff. Sarah hoped this meant the conversation would be more reasonable than her interaction with Dr. Rodriguez. When Sarah arrived at Mrs. Williams's office, she was surprised to find Dr. Chen waiting outside as well. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked. "Dr. Rodriguez filed a complaint about our interaction during that staff meeting," Dr. Chen explained. "Apparently he felt I was insubordinate when I defended your tattoo." Sarah felt terrible. She had never intended for her colleague to face consequences for supporting her, especially since Dr. Chen was still completing his residency and needed positive evaluations from attending physicians. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," she said. "Don't apologize. I said what I believed was right." Mrs. Williams called them into her office together, which Sarah interpreted as either a very good sign or a very bad one. The chief nursing officer was in her 50s, with gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that came from decades of hospital experience. "Please, sit down," Mrs. Williams said, gesturing to 2 chairs across from her desk. I want to discuss the incident that occurred during last week's staff meeting, but first I want to share some context you may not have. She opened a file folder and pulled out several documents. Dr. Rodriguez filed a formal complaint suggesting that Nurse Mitchell's visible tattoo violates hospital dress code policies and that Dr. Chen was disrespectful when he disagreed with this assessment. Sarah's stomach dropped. A formal complaint would become part of her permanent employment record and could affect future job opportunities. However, Mrs. Williams continued, after reviewing hospital policies and consulting with legal counsel, we've determined that Dr. Rodriguez's interpretation of our dress code was incorrect. Both Sarah and Dr. Chen looked surprised. Our dress code prohibits tattoos that are offensive, gang-related, or explicitly sexual in nature. It does not prohibit tattoos that relate to military service, religious beliefs, or other meaningful personal expression that doesn't interfere with patient care. Mrs. Williams pulled out another document. Additionally, I've received letters from 15 different patients over the past year, specifically praising Nurse Mitchell's care. 3 of those letters specifically mention how her tattoo helped them feel comfortable discussing their own military experiences during treatment. Sarah had no idea that patients had been writing letters about her care, let alone mentioning her tattoo positively. Mrs. Williams, Sarah said, I had no idea patients were writing letters. We don't always share positive feedback with individual staff members because we receive so much of it, but in this case I thought it was relevant to the discussion. Mrs. Williams smiled slightly. You've built quite a reputation for excellent care with our veteran patient population. Dr. Chen leaned forward in his chair. What does this mean for the complaint Dr. Rodriguez filed? It means the complaint against Nurse Mitchell will be dismissed and removed from her record. The complaint against Dr. Chen is more complicated because it relates to professional hierarchy and communication protocols. Sarah felt relief about her own situation, but she was worried about Dr. Chen's position. Residency programs were competitive, and any negative marks in his file could affect his career prospects. However, Mrs. Williams continued, after speaking with Dr. Chen's program director and reviewing the circumstances, we've determined that his comments were appropriate professional advocacy for a colleague and did not constitute insubordination. Both complaints were being dismissed, but Mrs. Williams wasn't finished. This situation has prompted a broader review of our policies regarding veteran staff members and veteran patients. We've discovered that we can do much better in both areas. She explained that the hospital was implementing new training programs for staff on veteran-specific healthcare needs and creating support resources for employees who were veterans themselves. Nurse Mitchell, we'd like you to help develop these programs. Your experience and the relationships you've built with veteran patients make you uniquely qualified to guide this initiative. Sarah was stunned. What had started as a complaint about her tattoo was turning into an opportunity to improve care for the veteran community. I'd be honored to help with that, she said. Dr. Chen, we'd also like you to participate in this program development. Your perspective as someone with close family ties to the veteran community would be valuable. After the meeting, Sarah and Dr. Chen walked out of the administrative offices together, both feeling relieved and somewhat overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. I can't believe that just happened, Sarah said. I'm just glad we're both keeping our jobs, Dr. Chen replied. For a while there, I thought I might be looking for a new residency program. Over lunch in the hospital cafeteria, they discussed the proposed veteran care initiatives. Dr. Chen shared stories about his brother's experiences with healthcare after returning from deployment, including both positive and negative encounters with medical staff who either understood or misunderstood military culture. My brother says the hardest part isn't always the medical treatment itself, Dr. Chen explained. It's dealing with healthcare workers who either treat him like a broken victim or like some kind of hero. He just wants to be treated like a normal person who happens to have some specific health issues related to his service. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. That's exactly what I was trying to achieve with the tattoo, actually. I wanted it to be visible so other veterans would recognize me as someone who understood their experience, but I didn't want it to define every interaction I had with patients. Has it worked out that way? Sometimes. When I connect with veteran patients, it's usually very meaningful for both of us. But with non-veteran patients and colleagues, it often creates complications I didn't anticipate. As they finished their lunch, Sarah reflected on how much her relationship with the tattoo had evolved over the years. What had started as a deeply personal memorial had become a tool for connecting with others who shared similar experiences, but it had also made her a target for misunderstanding and criticism. "Do you ever regret getting it?" Dr. Chen asked, as if reading her thoughts. Sarah considered the question carefully. "No, I don't regret it. But I've learned that making a private grief public comes with consequences I wasn't prepared for when I was 25 years old. Would you get it again, knowing what you know now?" "Yes, but I might choose a different location. Somewhere that could be visible when I wanted it to be, but covered when necessary." Their conversation was interrupted when Dr. Chen's pager went off, calling them both back to the emergency department. As they walked through the hospital corridors together, Sarah noticed how differently she felt about her work environment than she had just a few hours earlier. The complaint that had threatened her job security had instead resulted in recognition of her value to the institution and an opportunity to expand her impact on veteran care. The tattoo that Dr. Rodriguez had seen as a liability was now being acknowledged as an asset that enhanced patient relationships and care quality. For the first time since getting the tattoo, Sarah felt that her workplace truly understood and appreciated what it represented, rather than simply tolerating it or viewing it as a personal quirk that needed to be managed. 6 months after the hospital incident, Sarah was attending a medical conference in Chicago focused on trauma care and veteran health issues. The conference was her first major speaking engagement as part of the hospital's new veteran care initiative, and she was nervous about presenting her research on improving healthcare communication with military patients. The conference was held at a large downtown hotel with hundreds of healthcare professionals, researchers, and policymakers in attendance. Sarah's presentation was scheduled for the second day, giving her time to attend other sessions and network with colleagues from around the country. During a lunch break between presentations, Sarah was standing in line at the conference buffet when she overheard a conversation between two doctors behind her. They were discussing a presentation they had just attended about military sexual trauma, and their comments were making her increasingly uncomfortable. "I just think some of these veterans are exaggerating their symptoms to get benefits," one of them said. "Half of them probably never saw real combat anyway," the other doctor agreed. "And the women who claim sexual assault in the military are probably just looking for attention. You know how competitive those environments are. They probably couldn't cut it and needed an excuse." Sarah felt her face flush with anger. These were medical professionals speaking with shocking ignorance about the very patient population they were supposed to be learning to treat better at this conference. She turned around to face them. "Excuse me, but did you really just suggest that veterans are lying about their trauma?" Both doctors looked surprised and defensive. They were clearly not expecting to be confronted about their private conversation. "I was speaking generally," the first doctor said. "Obviously, real cases of trauma deserve treatment. And how exactly do you determine which cases are real?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but firm. "Do you have some special training in military culture and trauma that the rest of us don't know about?" Other conference attendees nearby had begun to notice the confrontation. Sarah was aware that she was making a scene at a professional event, but she couldn't let these comments go unchallenged. "Look, we're all here to learn," the second doctor said, trying to diffuse the situation. "I'm sure you have more experience with veteran patients than we do." "Yes, I do," Sarah said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal her tattoo. "And I am one." The doctor stared at her forearm, clearly not knowing what they were looking at, but understanding that it was significant. "These coordinates mark the location where my unit was ambushed in Afghanistan. 3 of my friends died there, and 2 others were severely wounded. I carry those coordinates with me every day, not because I want attention or benefits, but because I want to honor their sacrifice and remember what we went through together." A small crowd had gathered around them, including several other conference attendees who appeared to be veterans themselves based on their reactions to her words. "I'm also a nurse who specializes in veteran care," Sarah continued. "And I can tell you that the attitudes you just expressed are exactly why many veterans avoid seeking medical treatment until their conditions become life-threatening." One of the veterans in the crowd spoke up. "She's right. I avoided doctors for years because I was tired of being treated like either a fraud or a victim." Another person added, "My husband did 3 tours in Iraq and came home with PTSD. The first doctor he saw suggested that he was just looking for disability payments. The two doctors who had made the original comments looked increasingly uncomfortable as more people shared their experiences. They were clearly realizing that their casual dismissal of veteran trauma was not only inappropriate but also medically harmful. "I apologize," the first doctor said quietly. "I obviously don't understand these issues as well as I thought I did." "Then listen and learn," Sarah replied. "That's why we're all here." The crowd began to disperse as people returned to the conference sessions, but several veterans approached Sarah to thank her for speaking up. One woman who introduced herself as Dr. Jennifer Martinez was particularly appreciative. "I'm a psychiatrist who works with combat veterans," Dr. Martinez said. "What you just did was important. Too many medical professionals still have these attitudes, and it affects the quality of care our community receives." Dr. Martinez invited Sarah to join her for coffee after the day's sessions ended. They spent 2 hours discussing the challenges of providing health care to veterans and the importance of having veterans in healthcare roles to advocate for better understanding and treatment. "Your tattoo is powerful," Dr. Martinez said. "I have patients who would respond very positively to seeing that kind of visible memorial to military service." "It's been a double-edged sword," Sarah admitted. "It opens doors for meaningful connections, but it also makes me a target for people's assumptions and prejudices." "That's the burden of visibility," Dr. Martinez replied. "When you choose to make your experience public, you become responsible for educating others whether you want to or not." The next day, Sarah delivered her presentation to a packed conference room. She had decided to incorporate the previous day's confrontation into her talk, using it as an example of the attitudes that veterans often encountered in healthcare settings. Her presentation was well received, with extensive discussion during the question and answer session. Several attendees approached her afterward to request copies of her research and to invite her to speak at their own institutions. But the most meaningful moment came when a young resident physician approached her after her presentation. "I'm starting my emergency medicine residency next month," he said. "I'm also a veteran, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've been thinking about getting a tattoo to honor my squad, but I was worried it might hurt my career." Sarah looked at this young doctor, remembering her own uncertainty about the tattoo when she was starting her post-military career. "What kind of tattoo were you thinking about?" she asked. He explained his idea for a memorial tattoo that would be visible but not prominent, something that would allow other veterans to recognize him while not dominating his professional appearance. "My advice," Sarah said, "is to make sure you're prepared for the attention it will bring. People will ask questions, make assumptions, and sometimes say things that are hurtful or ignorant. But if you're ready to handle those challenges, a visible memorial can be a powerful way to honor your service and connect with veteran patients. Do you ever regret getting yours?" Sarah looked down at her forearm, thinking about all the experiences the tattoo had brought into her life over the past years, the difficult conversations, the misunderstandings, the moments of connection, and the opportunities to educate others about military service and sacrifice. "No," she said finally. "It's made my life more complicated, but it's also made it more meaningful. Those coordinates represent the worst day of my military career. But carrying them visibly has allowed me to honor my friends and help other veterans in ways I never anticipated." Flying home from Chicago, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of her tattoo's purpose had evolved. What had started as a personal memorial had become a tool for advocacy, education, and connection within the veteran community. She was no longer just carrying coordinates to remember the dead. She was carrying them to help the living. The conference had reinforced her commitment to the Veteran Care Initiative at her hospital and given her new ideas for expanding that work. She was beginning to see a clear path forward in her career that would allow her to use both her military experience and her medical training to improve healthcare for veterans. But most importantly, the conference had reminded her that she was not alone in carrying the weight of visible service. There were other veterans in healthcare who faced similar challenges and shared similar goals. Together, they could work to change attitudes and improve care for their community. 2 years later, Sarah's life had taken on a rhythm she never could have imagined when she first got her tattoo. The Veteran Care Program at City General Hospital had expanded into a nationally recognized model, and Sarah had been promoted to Director of Veteran Patient Services. Her visible memorial had become a symbol of the program's commitment to understanding and serving the military community. On a crisp October morning, Sarah was preparing for the hospital's annual Veteran Health Fair when her assistant informed her that a special guest had arrived early for the event. The guest was described only as a high-ranking military official who specifically requested to meet with you. Sarah assumed it was probably a local National Guard commander or perhaps a VA administrator who wanted to discuss the program. She was used to these kinds of meetings and didn't think much of it as she walked to the conference room. When she opened the door, she was shocked to see a man in Navy dress uniform with multiple ribbons and insignia, indicating very high rank. He was standing with his back to her, looking out the conference room window at the city skyline. "Commander Sarah Mitchell," he said, turning around. Sarah was stunned. No one had called her by her military rank in years, and she couldn't imagine how this officer even knew her former rank. "It's just Sarah now, sir. I've been out of the Navy for almost 8 years. The officer extended his hand. "I'm Admiral James Thompson, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command." Sarah's heart began racing. She knew that title. This man was in charge of all Navy SEALs and other special operations forces. She had no idea why someone of his rank would be at her hospital wanting to meet with her. "Sir, I'm honored to meet you, but I have to admit I'm confused about why you're here," Sarah said, shaking his hand. Admiral Thompson smiled slightly. "I'm here because of your tattoo." Sarah looked down at her forearm, completely bewildered. "My tattoo? Those coordinates. Do you mind if I take a closer look?" Sarah rolled up her sleeve, revealing the numbers and anchor that had been the subject of so many conversations over the years. Admiral Thompson studied them carefully and his expression grew serious. "Commander Mitchell, those coordinates mark the location where a Navy SEAL team was extracted after a classified rescue operation. 3 Army personnel were recovered alive from that location." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "I don't understand, sir. Your unit was ambushed at those coordinates, correct? 3 KIA, 2 wounded?" "Yes, sir." Admiral Thompson nodded slowly. "What you didn't know at the time was that your unit's distress call was received by a SEAL team operating in the area. They conducted an immediate rescue operation to extract your wounded teammates and recover your fallen." Sarah sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs, trying to process what she was hearing. The SEAL team leader on that operation was Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, now Commander Rodriguez. He's been looking for survivors of that ambush for years because he wanted them to know that their friends didn't die alone. Tears began forming in Sarah's eyes. For 8 years she had carried guilt about leaving her fallen teammates behind. The evacuation had happened so quickly, and she had been wounded herself. She had always wondered what happened to their bodies and whether they had suffered. "They didn't suffer," Admiral Thompson said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "The SEAL team reached them within minutes of the ambush. They were already gone, but they were treated with full military honors during the extraction." "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because Commander Rodriguez saw a photo of your tattoo in a medical journal article about veteran health care. He recognized the coordinates immediately and spent months tracking you down through military records and professional networks." Admiral Thompson pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo of a man in his 40s wearing civilian clothes. "He's actually here today. He's been waiting in the parking lot for an hour, trying to work up the courage to meet you." Sarah stared at the photo, trying to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The coordinates on her arm didn't just represent where her friends had died. They represented where another group of warriors had risked their lives to honor and recover them. "Would you be willing to meet with him?" Admiral Thompson asked. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Admiral Thompson stepped outside the conference room and returned a few minutes later with Commander Rodriguez. The man from the photo was taller than Sarah had expected, with graying hair and the kind of intense eyes that she recognized in other veterans who had seen combat. "Sarah," he said simply, extending his hand. "Commander Rodriguez," she replied, standing to shake his hand. "Just Mike, please. I've wanted to meet you for a very long time." They sat down at the conference table, with Admiral Thompson serving as a quiet witness to their conversation. "I want you to know," Mike said, "that your teammates died as heroes. They held their position and called for backup even while under heavy fire. Their actions probably saved civilian lives in that village. I've wondered about them every day for 8 years," Sarah said. "I've carried so much guilt about leaving them behind." "You didn't leave them behind," Mike said firmly. You were wounded and evacuated according to protocol. My team made sure your fallen were brought home with full honors." Mike pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "I brought you something." Inside the folder were 3 photographs of flag-draped caskets being loaded onto a military transport plane, along with documentation showing the full chain of custody from the battlefield to Dover Air Force Base. "I also brought you this," Mike said, pulling out a small metal object. It was a challenge coin, a military tradition where special coins are given to recognize exceptional service or commemorate significant events. This coin bore the seal trident on one side and the coordinates from Sarah's tattoo on the other. "My team had these made after the operation. We've carried them ever since as a reminder of that mission." Sarah held the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. The coordinates she had carried alone for so many years had also been carried by these warriors who had risked their lives to ensure her friends came home. "There's one more thing," Admiral Thompson said. "Commander Rodriguez and his team have been recommended for the Navy Cross for their actions that day. The ceremony is next month at the Pentagon. We'd like you to be there." Sarah looked at both men, overwhelmed by the revelation that her private grief had been shared by others who understood the true meaning of those coordinates. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll be there," Mike said. "Your friends deserve to have someone who knew them witness the recognition of those who brought them home." As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her tattoo would never again be just a personal memorial. It was now also a symbol of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the commitment that military personnel make to never leave anyone behind. Walking back to her office, Sarah thought about all the people who had questioned her tattoo over the years, who had made assumptions about what it meant or why she had chosen to get it. None of them could have imagined that those coordinates connected her to a story of heroism that extended far beyond her own experience. The Veteran Health Fair proceeded as planned that afternoon, but Sarah found herself looking at her tattoo differently. The numbers and anchor that had marked her loss now also marked her connection to warriors who had honored that loss through their own sacrifice and service. That evening, she called Linda to share what had happened. "I can't believe it," Linda said after hearing the story. "All these years you thought you were carrying that grief alone, and it turns out other people have been carrying it too." "I keep thinking about all the times people made fun of the tattoo or treated it like it was meaningless," Sarah said. "They had no idea they were looking at coordinates that connected me to some of the most heroic people in our military." "Does this change how you feel about having it visible?" Sarah considered the question. "No, it makes me more proud to wear it. Those coordinates don't just represent where we lost people. They represent where heroes refused to let them be forgotten." The next month, Sarah stood in the Pentagon as Commander Rodriguez and his team received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. When each man's citation was read, the coordinates from her tattoo were mentioned as the location where they had conducted their rescue operation. During the ceremony, Sarah finally understood the full meaning of the memorial she had been carrying on her arm. It wasn't just about honoring the dead, it was about recognizing the living who had honored them through their service and sacrifice. The coordinates that had marked her worst day had also marked other warriors' finest hour.